Thank you for downloading from Digital Mindfulness. This is episode number 32. This episode of Digital Mindfulness is sponsored by Semantica Research, a leading digital consultancy helping communications, social media, and marketing professionals make better and more informed decisions from digital data. My guest today is Cal Newport, Professor of Computer Science at Georgetown University. In addition to his academic work, Cal is the author of several influential books, including So Good They Can't Ignore You, which argues that following your passion is bad advice, and most recently, Deep Work. In Deep Work, instead of arguing that distraction is bad, Cal celebrates the power of the opposite, the ability to focus intensely on cognitively demanding tasks, a skill that he calls deep work. I hope you enjoy this episode with Cal Newport. Cal, welcome to the show. I'm delighted to have you on.
Hi, Lawrence. I'm happy to be here.
So your academic work focuses on the study of algorithms, and your writing, which then goes to focusing on hacks and attention, seems like a real logical step. But I'm wondering if you can just share with the audience your personal journey in terms of how you came to be focusing on attention in the digital age.
I cared about the topics in my own life. So if you actually look at the trajectory of the topics I write about, they match pretty well the trajectory of what was going on in my life at the time. So my first books, for example, were about how to do better as a student. Well, I wrote those books while an undergraduate and graduate student. I wrote them at a time where those topics were of great interest to me. Then as I made the transition from being a graduate student into academia, this was a very important job transition. It seemed like a very fraught decision about what I was going to do with the rest of my life. An academic job, if done right, could be a job for life. And it was in that period that I wrote So Good They Can't Ignore You, which is really about career decisions. How do you figure out what you love? How do you navigate that decision? And then once I had a job as a professor, the thing that really caught my attention was, how do I do this really well? How do I do this job in a way that I'm proud of and is rewarding and successful? And that's what led to the latest book, which is Deep Work.
So let's talk a little bit more about deep work, because you've written that you think that the ability to focus is the new IQ in the workplace, and that the ability to intensely focus on cognitively demanding tasks will yield massive results. Why is this?
Yeah, I think if you can master the art of deep work, which is where you focus without distraction for a long time on a cognitively demanding task, if you can do that well, you get massive benefits for two reasons. One, it's a state that allows you to learn complicated things quickly. And this is becoming increasingly important in the knowledge economy. You have to keep picking up new skills, new ideas, new techniques. Deep work masters do this very quickly. Therefore, they can jump quickly onto new ideas, new trends. Two, and I think even more important, when you do deep work, you produce stuff of massively more value than when you work in a state of distraction, and you produce this work at a massively faster rate than if, like most people, you work in a state of constant, continuous distraction. So a lot of people know in their field that one guy or that one woman who just seems to be like a superhero in terms of what they produce and how good it is and the rate at which they produce. Often deep work is the explanation for how they're pulling that off.
Okay, so what I really want to do is just to come back to the top a little bit and just have you explain a little bit more what this word deep actually means as part of deep work.
So to me, it means you are putting your skills to use at the very limit of your ability. So you're taking your skills you've developed, you're applying them at the limit of your ability. You're giving the thing that you're working on your full concentration without distraction, intense concentration without distraction. You are, in short, trying to produce the best possible thing you can produce. And I contrast that to what I call shallow work, which are work tasks that don't necessarily leverage your abilities to things that you've trained to do. It's often more logistical in nature, things that you can do while distracted, things that are easily replicated and maybe don't create a lot of new value. Now, there's nothing wrong with shallow work, but I think the right way to think about it is that shallow work is what tends to allow you to keep your job, while deep work is what allows you to get promoted.
It sounds like what you're saying is that deep work really allows you to engage with and master complicated tasks and cognitively demanding tasks very, very quickly. Whereas shallow work is something that we can do that, yes, it allows us to keep our jobs, but it's something that really we can do cognitively on autopilot. Is that something you'd agree with?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we have research from both psychology and neuroscience which emphasize this fact that the only way to efficiently pick up a complicated new ability or piece of information is that it requires undistracted and intense concentration. And you can even track that process down to what's happening in the individual neurons. Down at the individual neurons, what's actually happening is if you're really focusing hard on something without distraction, you're isolating in your brain the relevant neural circuits to what you're trying to learn. And they're completely isolated, firing again and again. And it's that isolated, clarified firing that actually allows cells in the neurons, what they call oligodendrites, to come and lay a sheath of myelin along the cell walls, which allows them to, going forward, fire more easily, fire more readily. That's actually the neuronal correlate to what it means to learn something. So if you are glancing at your inbox, glancing at Facebook, then trying to read a little bit more of what you're trying to learn, and glance back at your inbox, what's happening in your head is tons of noise. Tons of different neurons are firing off. There's no circuit being sufficiently isolated to really allow the brain to do its work of cementing circuits and helping you learn new things.
So, if we were to extrapolate what you just said to say something like driving, where, for example, people sometimes look at their phones whilst they're driving, and there are so many distractions, not only on your phone but on the road. That would be why then, kind of bringing the two together, checking your phone while driving, that's why it would be so dangerous.
Yeah, see, I think in driving, we're more used to this analogy. That in driving, if you see something interesting on your phone, for example, we have this expectation that your attention has been captured and you're going to be much more likely maybe to get in a car accident. But this exact same thing is happening when you're actually doing work at your desk. There's a theory called attention residue, which plays a big role in why deep work can seem so much more productive than what most people do. And it's because if you glance at some other source of information like an inbox and then bring your attention back to your primary work task, the inbox glance leaves a residue of attention inside your brain that actually impairs your cognitive ability. And it can take 10, 15, 20 minutes for that to actually clear out. Now, I think this is significant because what a lot of knowledge workers today do instead of the pure deep work I advocate is serial single tasking, where most of their time they're looking at the hard thing they're trying to do, and they don't have their inbox window open, so they feel like they're not multitasking, but they glance every 10 or 15 minutes just to make sure there's not something there. We've been taught that's the responsible way to be a knowledge worker in a connected age. But we know from attention residue theory that that's actually disastrous. That every time you take that glance, you're impairing your cognitive ability for another 15, 20 minutes to follow. And most knowledge workers will check that inbox 10, 15 times in the standard hour. So it means that most knowledge workers are working with this sort of residue of cognitive impairment in their head, which is why the deep workers, those who can concentrate intensely for 1, 2, 3 hours at a time with no distraction, their output can seem so much more massively large in quality than the typical person. It's because they're actually using their brain in the way that it's actually best used.
One of the other phrases that you've used in your writing is this whole idea of there are masters of deep work. And these are people who are able at will to get into that state of mind where they are producing deep work. And I was wondering if you can just share with us some examples of people who are able to do this.
Yeah, so close to my own field of academia, I talk about the celebrated professor at Wharton, Adam Grant, who is a year older than me, but is a full professor at Wharton, the youngest full professor at Wharton, and is considered by his colleagues to be sort of absurdly productive in his academic output. And a big part of how he's able to pull this off, it turns out, is that he is a master of deep work. And what he actually does is when it comes time to work on a paper, he'll take a 2 to 4 day stretch and be completely isolated during those 2 to 4 days and do nothing but think intensely on that paper he's writing. And it turns out when you're able to give that much depth of intensity towards one thing, you can produce things at a very fast rate, but also of a really high level of quality. So I think he's a perfect example of someone who leverages their ability to focus very intensely to produce a lot of high quality output.
Is deep work also something that you're able to drop into at will?
Well, deep work has been very useful to me as well. I mean, it's something that I've for a long time advocated, but I'll say when I was writing this book, I got a new lesson in just how powerful deep work can be. During the year when I was writing this book, you would expect that my academic output would go down because I have a limited amount of time, and now I was taking a non-trivial fraction of that time and spending it on writing a book. So that's just less time to spend doing my primary goal of writing research papers. But because I was writing a book on deep work, I was thinking a lot about my deep work habits. I was tuning things up. I was taking it very seriously. I was really brushing up on my habits. And my academic output in the year I was writing the book doubled as compared to any other year. So even though my time got more severely limited, I actually doubled my output. And I like that story because I think it emphasizes what I'm trying to say, which is a lot of people think about distraction and lack of focus as sort of a nuisance. Like, yeah, I probably should focus more. Maybe I'd get a little bit more done. And what I'm saying in my experience and experience of others like Adam Grant, if you really train yourself to focus, if you really take your attention seriously and give it respect, if you really fight to have long periods of concentration in your life, it doesn't make you just a little bit more productive. It makes you massively more productive. It's what allows you to double your output while significantly cutting down your time. And it has this added benefit that a deep life, a life full of this type of deep concentration, is just much more meaningful and satisfying than the frenetic busyness that most of us fall into today.
So, if we were to extend your point outwards just a little bit to, for example, personal relationships, that's really interesting, isn't it? Because the more attention that we're able to place, if we're able to have, say, deep attention in our relationships and our conversations, then the emotional connection and the conversations that we have with people are suddenly much richer in both content but also emotional connection, and that would lead to much richer and much deeper relationships.
Yeah, that's true. And in fact, I'll say this was something that surprised me as well when writing the book is that originally, the focus was on the economic benefits of deep work and then how you take advantage of them. But as I was researching the book, I kept running into research from a variety of different fields that were pointing towards the conclusion that deep work is going to make you happier, deep work is going to make your life more meaningful, deep work is going to make you more satisfied. It wasn't my intent to write about that aspect of deep work, but I ran into so much evidence of that being true that I ended up adding quite a large chapter to the book that draws from neuroscience, psychology, and philosophy. So, three independent types of investigations that all three point to the same conclusion, which is a life that's full of rapt attention and focus, a life that has a much more reduced level of frenetic busyness and attention switching, is a life that we're wired to find less anxiety producing. It's a life that we're going to find much more pleasurable. And I'll tell you, I got away from some of this recently because I had the book launch, and it meant that I had to check things more, and I got away from some of my deep work habits. And I realized pretty quickly that I was feeling miserable. It's because I had been taking for granted the benefit you get when you slow down and have this deeper life. And so it really only took a week or two of getting back to let me check my inbox all the time and go online all the time to realize, oh, wait a second, the way that I was living before, the way that a lot of people live in the digital age is really not a very enjoyable way to exist.
But you could also say that there are many, many people that don't know that they're living in this state of kind of constant distraction, and which leads to, as you were saying, maybe unhappiness and certainly that lack of focus.
Yeah, I don't think they realize. And I don't think I realize either. It's the more I embrace deep work. See, the nice thing about this topic is that here's the Trojan horse: is that you're going to be much better at your job. So, I'm not one that just would naturally be out there looking for how do I make my life more meaningful and satisfied. I'm a hyper rational mathematician type guy. So I came at deep work from the how do I produce. I need to write better papers. It's very hard. Peer reviewed academic math papers are very hard, and I wanted to do it better. And how do I do this? And deep work made sense. And then the side effect was, wait a second, my life is so much more tolerable. I had no idea. There's this low level of anxiety that I think a lot of people exist with, that they think this is just essentially the background noise of your life. This is just how it feels to be alive. And when you get away from that and reduce it, it's you realize that, oh, wait a second, that was completely artificial and unnecessary.
I think you're right, and I absolutely love that analogy that there's this low level of background noise that we've just grown accustomed to as we're switching tasks and we're going to different digital services. And rather, maybe in this digital age, this background noise, as you put it, has gotten louder. But I just want to kind of focus on now how we can get into this state so we can get into deep work. And one of the things that you talk about there are four different pillars of deep work. And I'm wondering if you can just kind of go into a little bit more detail in that and share with the audience how they can, at will, get into this state where they're producing deep work.
Yeah, we could think of the four rules as the four categories of things you can and should do if you want to embrace a deep lifestyle. So the first rule was called work deeply. And the type of strategies that describes are ways to make sure that you put aside and protect time regularly in your schedule for deep work and have rituals built up to make sure that you get the most out of those times when you get to them. The second rule was called embrace boredom. And this is built on the idea that a lot of people miss, which is the ability to concentrate is a skill that has to be practiced. People think of it often like a habit, such as flossing your teeth, something they know how to do. I know how to focus, I just need to do it more. But actually, it's a skill. It's something you have to practice. And the more you practice your ability to concentrate, the more intensity of concentration you can get out of your deep work session. So the sort of second category of strategies are all about how do you train your ability to concentrate. The third rule was called quit social media. And what this is saying is that if you want to take your attention seriously and see it as the primary tool with which you make a living, then you do need to treat it with respect. Now, I don't argue that all people, for example, should quit social media, but I do argue that people should be much more discerning about what tools they give access to their time and attention. And they have to get past the mindset that if this tool offers any benefit, then that's enough to justify me using it. I lay out a much higher bar. In my own life, for example, I've never had a social media account, and I can tell you, nothing bad happens. I still have friends. I can still sell books. I still know what's going on in the world, but my attention is a lot less cluttered. And the final rule is called drain the shallows, and this recognizes that shallow work, that is non-deep work, is necessary in almost every job. So this is about how you eliminate what you can, and then be much more efficient about what you handle, how you handle what remains, so that you have much more time free for the type of deep work that's going to produce the real value and satisfaction.
So, how can people identify what is shallow in their lives and what is actually deep? Because I'm sure a lot of people are thinking now, okay, that's fantastic about deep work, but how can I identify what is shallow and go to some way to eliminating the non essential bits?
Yeah, it's a good question because I think the first step is just recognizing that work is not work. There's the deep stuff and the shallow stuff, and you need to make sure that both are getting a lot of time. That's the first step. So there are some corner cases. Some things are obviously shallow. I mean, if you're checking Twitter or checking your email, that's not pushing your skills to their limit to create new value in the world. But there's some things that are more complicated. So my general rule of thumb is ask yourself, if I had to take a recent college graduate who is smart but had no special training and teach them to do what I'm about to do, how long would it take them? And if the answer is I could teach them how to do this in an hour, I'm just answering emails or I'm checking things online or I'm updating my WordPress theme, then that means it's shallow work. It's not using hard-won skills. It's not pushing your abilities to their limit. On the other hand, if you say this would take a very long time to get them to do this. I'm about to write something, and I've been writing for 10 years and have a real craft here. Or I'm about to do computer code, and I've been computer programming for 15 years, and I'm really, really good at it. Then that's something that could be a deep task because it's using hard-won skills and gives you the opportunity to push your abilities to their limit.
So, would you say then that creating specific processes or routines or rituals are important to getting into that state where we do produce deep work?
Well, a lot of people have routines and rituals, and it's something I recommend to have a set routine or ritual you do before you start doing deep work can help your mind shift into the deep work mindset more automatically. If you instead just try to wrench your attention away from what you're doing and say, just concentrate right now, that's going to take a lot more willpower and you might not always be successful. So, a deep work routine or ritual can be as simple as clearing your desk and putting a do not disturb sign on your door and closing your door. Or it can be something more complex like a walk you do on a path in the woods before you get a special type of coffee and sit by a log and do your initial thinking with a fancy notepad. There's a whole spectrum. But the point is, having a routine or ritual that your mind is used to as a signifier that it's time to think deeply really does help you succeed.
So, it sounds here like having a deep level of self-awareness is really important here, like knowing exactly, knowing your patterns, knowing what processes lead you into that state where you can produce deep work. I know for myself, I have my own set patterns, and these have definitely been hard won, but definitely a large portion of that was having a kind of deeper sense of myself and my self-awareness. And would you say that self-awareness is important?
I think that's right. There is a lot of self awareness. Just like an athlete is very aware of their body and their muscles and their lungs, and they're very aware of like what they eat and if they smoke and all these type of other how much sleep they're getting. They really care about all these factors. They're not going to go do downhill skiing in the middle of their season because it's risky for their body. People who take deep work seriously, who take their attention seriously, you have to have that same sort of awareness. It means I'm not going to watch TV at night with a tablet in my hand so that I'm not bored for a moment because that's ruining my ability to concentrate. I'm not going to whip out my phone at every second when I need a little stimuli because that's going to ruin my ability to concentrate. I'm not going to say yes to so many things because if I'm always running around trying to keep up with these shallow tasks, it's going to eat up all my energy and I won't be able to concentrate. I'm going to fight for my schedule. I'm going to stop using Facebook. This thing is just destroying me. I don't really need it. I take my attention seriously. So I think you're hitting the nail on the head here when you note that there's a lot of self-awareness and a lot of effort that goes into supporting this lifestyle, which is why I think so few people do it. But I think the rewards are worth it.
So, would you say then that intensity here plays a role? Because I know in some of your writing you've said that you don't work on weekends and you don't work at night. Yet you've got a family, you're an author, and you also are an academic and you teach, and so that takes up an awful lot of your time. But you have, it would seem to people, a lot of free time to spend. And would you say that's as a result of the intensity that you're able to place in your work, as a result of deep work?
Yeah, that's a big part of it. So the equation I like is that the high quality work produced is a function of the time spent times the intensity of focus while you're working. So if you can increase your intensity of focus, you get more done per unit of time actually spent. Now, the flip side is you have to train it. So, I spend a lot of effort trying to train my ability to focus. And this is one of the reasons why is that I want to get more, out of the time I actually spend. So, the focus is not just a habit we all know how to do. It's a highly honed skill that you can get better and better at the more you respect it.
So how then do you train your attention? Do you meditate, or do you use other techniques such as the Pomodoro technique?
Yeah, there's many different strategies. I'll briefly mention two. So one, practicing boredom is really important, so that you have lots of time in your life at work and out of work where you're just bored. By which I mean you don't have novel stimuli. Um, and what I suggest if you really want to practice this is don't schedule when you're going to be focused or bored. Schedule when you're going to be distracted. Say, all right, I'm home from work now. I'm going to go nuts on my phone and computer and tablet from 8 to 8:45. Until I get there, no phone, no tablet, no internet. I just need to be here. And if I'm bored for a while, I'm bored for a while. That helps your brain wean itself from an addiction to novel stimuli. Because if you have that addiction, it has a very hard time maintaining focus when it comes times to focus. Another quick thing I'll mention is what I call productive meditation, which is like mindfulness meditation, except for you give yourself a single professional problem that you try to hold in your mind and make progress on. And just like with mindfulness meditation, when you notice your attention has wandered off from that problem, you just notice that, bring your attention back to the problem, reload it up in your head, and try to push deeper. And this is like calisthenics for your brain. If you practice productive meditation 20, 30 minutes a day, a few days a week, you'll notice pretty quickly that your ability to really keep your attention on a target for a long amount of time and to get deeper when your attention is on it is going to drastically improve.
So, what would you say to people who would argue that deep work is one specific kind of intelligence and that we actually need to practice other kinds of intelligence, and particularly those which the internet allows us to practice? For example, collaboration and mass collaboration, that the internet allows us to offload some of the cognitive load on particularly demanding tasks, and that we can actually come together and leverage the power of many brains to solve a big problem.
Well, this is an ideology called internet centrism, and it's an ideology that's flawed. That this notion that connectivity by itself is intrinsically good, and anything that's non-connectivity related is going to be intrinsically inferior. And we just don't have a lot of evidence that's true. What we actually see what's happening in our economy right now is that things that can be automated are being automated. And the skills that are remaining, that are still valuable, that are still in demand, are those that are very hard to automate. Things that require great creativity and depth of thinking. And if you study this topic, there's really no way to produce things of real value, to produce things at the limit of your abilities without giving it intense concentration. So no one ever built a fortune, changed an industry, or changed the world because they were very fast at responding to emails, or because they were the first person to click like on your Facebook wall. The things that matter always, if you look at any example, the things that matter, at the core of it, there's going to be someone who is pushing their brain to its limit, right? People didn't make $1 billion by being good at Facebook. They made $1 billion by figuring out how to build the innovative distributed systems that run Facebook. And that was an intrinsically deep task.
That's right, because in your book, you use as an example Bill Gates, and you say that one of the reasons for his success is his ability to intensely focus to create value.
Yeah, I tell the story, and actually, it's online now. There's an article on Business Insider that excerpts that story from my book, so you can actually find it online. But if you look at the primary sources about the founding of Microsoft, what Steve Ballmer notices and still remembers to this day was Bill Gates' deep work ability, that he could give the problem. In this case, it was building the very first version of BASIC for the very first microcomputer, which is the first product of what became Microsoft. So he launched Microsoft. They programmed this version of BASIC in an incredibly short period of time. And the reason they're able to get it done is that Bill Gates was a deep work master. He could concentrate so intensely that for hours he would concentrate and then just fall asleep on his desk, and then wake up hours later and then just start going again from where he was before. And it was really that intensity, that depth that allowed him to produce this thing that was so good in such little bit amount of time that he was able to get out there first and create an industry. No amount of fast emailing or social networking or checking out BuzzFeed, would have built Microsoft. But Bill Gates' ability to focus intensely played a big role.
That's great. So, unfortunately, we have to finish. Where can people find out more about you and your work?
Well, calnewport.com has my blog where I've been writing for years about these ideas and how you can help cultivate them. And then if you want to find the book, you can find it on Amazon or in bookstores in a lot of places around the world.
Great. Well, Professor Cal Newport, thank you so much for spending time with us today and sharing your ideas and your wisdom and your insight. I really appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you, Lawrence. And remember, I strongly believe that deep life is a good life.